So let me tell you about a rule that there was in my house when I was growing up. And I'm going to be vulnerable to you today. I just want you to know. This is how it was in our household. And if you know me, you know that my parents were wonderful, wonderful parents. And they're still around. We still see them. And I'm so massively grateful to them. But there was a rule that my dad had, which I kind of look back on and think, not sure I'm going to copy that rule, Dad. And this rule that my dad had was that he would never, ever, under any circumstances, pay for me to have my hair cut. Never. And so from the age of 0 to the age of 15, my mum cut my hair. Now, I don't think that's had a sufficiently strong reaction. You have to understand that not only did my mum cut my hair and my 2 brothers' hair, but my hair that I've inherited from my dad has 2 things at the front, which most people call cowlicks. Has anybody else in the room, you've got a cowlick? Yeah. Now what this means is that your hair sticks up straight, like a cow has licked the front of your hair. And so my hair, and so my mum would cut my hair. And my dad's second rule was that never in any circumstances would you use any gel or any product on your hair. And so if you look at our school photos, if you look across the class, there'll be just person after person, and then somewhere in the middle, there'd be this kid with just hair sticking up. Now, not only do I have 2 cowlicks, one at each front, I also have a double crown. Now, some of you've got afro, you're thinking, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. A double crown is where your hair sticks up like this. And sometimes in the class, if there wasn't the sort of, the TV wasn't working properly or whatever, the other kids in the class would be like, why don't we just use Tom's hair as our aerial, as our antenna, and he can pick up the signal? And do you know what? I just thought that this is what life was going to be about. Every time I'd be like, Mum, I found a nice new haircut. Could you cut it? And she'd be like, well, there's only one haircut I can do. And so she'd do that haircut. Now, at the age of 15, a friend actually came to me and said, you know what? You could just go yourself to the hairdressers, to the barbers, and get a haircut. And I'd started to have a summer job. So I had a little bit of money. And one of the greatest days of my life was I got on my bike, and I didn't have a clue what to do. I didn't have a clue. And my dad was at the door saying, don't waste your money on a haircut. I mean, your mum can cut your hair. But I put the money in my pocket, and I got on my bike, and I cycled to the hairdressers. And as I locked my bike up at the front, and I had this sense of excitement, anticipation. And as I went in, and I kind of didn't know what to do, but I got the idea that you sat there, and then they'd call you, and sat in one of these chairs. And the guy asked me a question I'd never been asked before in my whole life. What do you want doing to your hair? And I looked and I thought, what answer do I give? And I said, I don't know what answer to give. And he said, well, look at those pictures on the wall in front of you. And are there any of those pictures? You know what I'm talking about? When you go, now, I've never dared venture into a lady's hairdresser. But in a men's barber's, there'll be pictures on the wall of various people looking incredibly cool. And you think, I want to look like that guy. And so I pointed and said, look like that guy. And the guy cut my hair. And then, once he finished cutting my hair, he said, would you like any product in your hair? And I said, do I have to pay extra? Because I only had a bit of cash in my pocket and I didn't think I could. And he went, no, it's all part of it. I went, yes, I would. Put as much product in my hair as you can possibly put in my hair. And he gelled it directly backwards so that all the cowlicks and all the double crowns stuck up just like everything else. All of it just stuck up. And it was called the messy look. And I came out of that And I didn't put my bike helmet on the way home because I did not want to mess up my hair. Now, Paul is telling the Ephesian church something very similar to what my friend told me when he said, you know what? You can actually go and get your hair cut by somebody who knows what they're doing, and they can put product in your hair. Except he didn't say it about the hair, he said it about your soul. And what he says to everybody, to all of humanity is, do you know what? Most people's souls have a cowlick or two. They don't look like you want them to look. Most people's souls, when you get into a moment like, school photo day, and everyone's taking a picture of saying, hey, what do you really like? Let's capture forever an image of who's you. Like, what are you? What's in your soul? Most of us think, oh man, please no. Can I be ill this day? Most of us have cowlicks in our soul. And what Paul says with all that first bit that sounded a bit bleak and grim is he's saying most people in life go through life thinking, I'm stuck with what I've got. I'll just make the best of it. I'm stuck with what I've got. This is just who I am. I'll just make the best of it. And what Paul says is that actually that's a darkening of your mind. Because God created you to have a haircut by Him, to look perfectly in with who you are, to have your soul formed by Him, and the Spirit will be poured onto your soul like gel to make it look as God always intended it to look. And so I ask you the question today, and the whole focus of this passage is, are you somebody who knows and has a vision of what you would look like when God really got His hands on you? When you let God form you and shape you and mold you into being exactly who He created you to be? Have you got on the wall in front of you those pictures of different versions of what it looked like to be in Christ, depending on who you are? And have you got that image that you look at and think, that's where I'm headed? That's what I want to look like. And Lord, would you cut me and mold me and put gel on me and shape me that I can become like that? And that is Ephesians chapter 4. Now let's show you this in picture form. My parents, as well as not wanting to spend money on haircuts, were mathematicians. And I used to spend my whole life trying to get away from maths. And now over and over again, I preach using graphs. And this is just one of the beautiful things. So you're born, says Paul. And as you go through your life along the bottom line there, you see that what happens is at some point, Jesus reveals Himself to you. Now, some of you grew up with Christian parents, and you never know the point when He hadn't revealed Himself to you. Some of you came to faith at a moment, and Jesus really appeared to you and said, the kingdom of God is at hand. And some of you are sat here, and that still hasn't happened yet. You're still back there. And you haven't actually realized that Jesus is real. And He's for you. And He's saying, this is my kingdom. Understand and be light. Have your mind switched on by my kingdom. But at that point, He says, the kingdom is at hand. And then the Christian life is this. You can choose. Will you go on living your old way of life, just doing whatever? Paul calls that having a dark mind and a hard heart. Now, what that means is just the light hasn't switched on. You didn't realize you can be changed. You're still living with your cowlicks sticking up and your double crown. You didn't realize it can be different. And your heart is hard because you're saying, I don't believe that it could be different. You're telling me it could be different, but this is just who I am. And Paul says you can carry on in that way of life, but ultimately that way of life leads to very bad places and has no future. But Jesus, in His coming of the kingdom, makes available to you a whole new way of life, the top line, where you can be born of the kingdom. You can be born of the kingdom. So no longer is it just you and what you have and are able to do that is in you, but now it's His goodness. And as you see that and understand that, you can begin, that's possible for me. I can actually be transformed to look a bit like Jesus, to look more like Jesus, to be somebody who just walks in truth and beauty and love all the time, every day. And the blue arrows represent how we are transformed from just carrying on as we were to being somebody defined and living out the new self. And that is what Paul says in verses 22 to 24. This is what he says. You were taught about Christ. You heard the truth about Christ. You've heard who he is. It's the preaching of the kingdom. This is what is the blue arrows that take you from just carrying on as you were, that switch a light on in your mind, that enable you to be transformed. It's the truth of the kingdom. It's words. It's words. And the Spirit, but words. Where Paul really pulls out words today. So my question is this: do you have words to describe what you would look like fully transformed, living out the new self that Jesus died and rose again to give you? Can you describe it? What would you look like when Jesus totally and utterly transformed you? What are the words that would describe that? It's all about words. Now, I just want to flag up, this is really hard, actually. We live in a river. And the river for some of us flows really fast, and for others of us flows slowly, but it's a river with a current. And the current of this river is constantly taking you in the direction of just do whatever. Just do whatever. You can't be transformed. Just do whatever. And for some of you, you're living, even in your home environment, the current of your river constantly is pulling you towards not believing that Jesus really loves you, not believing that he really died to transform you, not believing that you can really be changed. And the current is incredibly strong for you. Now, for others of you, actually just through the grace of God, the current is quite weak, but it's still a current. And what Paul says is that church, as we gather, on Sundays, in small groups, just informally, just in spaces, like there's a board games night coming up a week on Friday, just in spaces like you just go, and whenever you gather in these spaces, the current becomes against the current that you live in. The words that we choose to speak, the preaching of the gospel becomes a kind of a countercurrent. And he pushes you to actually believe again, wow, Jesus wants to transform me. He wants to change me. And he can. He can. And he is. He is. Just say to the person next to you, Jesus can change you. Jesus can change you. And he is. He is. He is. If you hear his words. And so church becomes a place where every word we speak becomes a chance to help people move towards that vision that God has for them. Every word we speak. And actually not just gathered church, but every follower of Jesus, every word you speak can become a word that leads people and nudges them and nurtures them towards becoming this person who is put on the new self, in Paul's language, who is now living the life that Jesus died to give them. This is what he says, verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. Okay, each of you. So, I think Duncan spoke about this a while back, but an understanding of what preaching is might say that what I'm doing now is preaching. The ministry of the word can be associated purely with a person stands up and preaches. But what Paul says is that each of you preach with the words you speak to your neighbor. So look at the person next to you and the other person on the other side of you. The words you speak to them or don't speak to them this morning is you preaching the word to them or not preaching the word to them. So you look across the room, just have a look at some of these fine faces. Look at these fine faces. Now you have a chance, and actually Jesus has put on your tongue words you can speak to the people in this room, which is you preaching to them the invitation to become all that God has died and created them to become. So each of us does this all the time. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So you could speak something that would actually take somebody back to the low level of the graph. Just jump onto the graph. There you go. You could say things that take people down. You suck out of them hope and faith and joy. You could speak words. And some of the most painful experiences most of us have had is when people have said things to us that suck that stuff out of us, isn't it? But you can speak words that lead people to actually thinking, well, God could use me. He could transform me. This is who I could become. Now, anybody like cycling? Just give us a wave. Anybody watch the Tour de France? Yeah. So the Tour de France, one of my boys absolutely loves it, so we watch it every summer. It's normally in July. And there's a key stage which they don't do every single year, but it's called Alpe d'Huez. Anybody been to Alpe d'Huez? You know what it is? Alpe d'Huez, it's this mountain, obviously it's called an Alp. It's a mountain which has a road which runs up it, and it's got lots of hairpins. And for the cyclists to go up this, it's kind of considered the Alp. It's the greatest Alp that can be climbed by cyclists. It's probably not the hardest, but it's just considered to be like that epic climb. And what happens if we just jump on to the next slide? Is crowds of people line the route. Now, they'll get there the night before, and they'll line up, and they'll be ready. They'll probably camp overnight, and they'll wait at the side of the road. And this guy in the middle here is a guy called Tom Pidcock, who is probably one of my favorite cyclists. And he, this year, was the guy who, this last year they did it, he actually won the stage. But what I want you to look at is this picture, and think about, where are you in this picture? Because the call of the church is this: we become the crowd. And people we see become Tom Pidcock. And our neighbor becomes Tom Pidcock. And we go and say, come on, you can do it. It's not that far. Like, we cheer them on with our words. We cheer each other on with our words. We become like the crowd. Now, the vision that God has for this church is that we become like this. And any one of us could be the cyclist at any moment. But our focus in this is that we get together and we cheer others on and say, come on, let's be transformed. Put on the new self. You don't have to be down and dark in your mind. You don't have to be hard in your heart. Put on the new self. Come on, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. And what Paul says is that every single word you speak becomes a word that helps people climb in their walk of faith towards becoming everything that Jesus died and called them to be. You never speak a word like, oh, you're not going to make this. You never speak a word that tears people down. You only ever say words that build people up. Now, we have a friend who actually, Ellie Mumford, who's coming next weekend. And she, I found to be one of the people who just did this more than any other person I think I've ever met. Every time she opened her mouth, she would encourage me. She'd speak good things. She'd speak truth to me. Now, not the vain encouragement like, hey, you can do it. But like, Jesus loves you. He's only ever used people like us. I can see that he's changing you. Just really hugely encouraging woman. And for me personally, I look back on the words that she spoke regularly and think that she urged me on. I would love it. It would just be the most wonderful thing if we all became like that. Imagine what this community would be. Imagine how well people would do. Now, I want to just invite Sal up at this moment. If you could grab, have you got the mic? Wonderful. Let's give Sal a round of applause. Now, Sal is going to be for us our Tom Pidcock. And we're going to encourage him and cheer him on. But let's first hear. So, Sal, you were in this church about, well, let's just say 3 years ago, and you left. Why did you do that? Tell us about that.
About 3 years ago, I was kind of sent or asked if I would like to go into the area of Merton in London. There was a church there that had started, but the pastors were moving on, and the church wanted to carry on meeting a small congregation, and I was asked if I wanted to go and take over and just try to carry on or do a kind of replant. And and after a lot of prayer and talking to a lot of people, and we felt that this was what the Lord wanted at the time, so I went, I moved there.
And so you went because you felt Jesus asked you to go. And now you're back. So why are you back?
So I got in there, and we started working, and I think the Lord did a lot of things, and it was like in the middle of lockdown, and I think it was a season that God wanted me there, and even to get those guys to lock down together. It was all online for the first 6 months at least, but then things changed, and for a lot of different reasons and different circumstances, it started to become more and more clear that it was unsustainable to carry on, not just to myself, but to the other trustees in the church. And together we came to the conclusion that, I decided first, I think it took me about 6 or 7 months just praying about it. It was an easy decision because it involved other people's lives that I couldn't carry on. It became unsustainable for many different reasons. And the trustees agreed, so we decided to stop the work in there, and that's why I'm back in here.
So as you went, I assume you would have had visions of what success would look like and where this would be and what God would want to use you to do. And then now you probably stand in a place where some of that you think that didn't happen. How does that? How do you navigate that? What do you tell us? Some of your honest feelings and thoughts and.
Yeah, I think when you go somewhere that you feel the Lord is sending you, you feel like, well, the Lord is calling me to an adventure. Yeah, let's go. It's going to be amazing, and there's all these thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to have loads of people, and you imagine that eventually you have something like this happening wherever you are, and so, but reality was different, and there was different circumstances and different dynamics and different things at play that I didn't expect, because it was a church that was already happening, and I came from a different church with a different background, so things were different, and not everything worked the way I imagined. And I'm sure it wasn't what they imagined either. So it's not like one or the other. God did some amazing things. Like when I joined, it was like about 9 people, and when we finished, we had at least doubled that number of people in about 2 years, which was good. But then it got to a point where it was like, well, I can't carry on, and I know that the Lord hasn't finished. I don't think He has finished with me. And whilst there are people needing to be saved in Merton, He hasn't finished with Merton either. But at this point in time, that was not what He was doing. So I just had to come to terms with what is the Lord actually doing. So I should stop and just go back and try to work that out with the Lord. One thing that is clear to me more than ever is that I had no other reason to leave if it's not for Jesus. Be it here, be it in Merton, whatever He is doing, that's where I want to be. So that became clear to me, is just trying to be sensitive to His voice and obey when He says, as hard as it might be, to decide something like that. So I hope it made sense.
It does make sense. And what is so important for us to know in these times is that putting on the new self is about character. It's about obedience to Jesus. It's about doing what he asks us to do. And so Sal, in these last few years, he's too humble to say, but it's been painful. It's been challenging. And sometimes to put on the new self, we can think that means, hey, life's going to be so easy, and I'm going to walk into a room and everyone's going to just, wow, Jesus is so amazing. But the reality is that in the kingdom, what we celebrate is obedience. What it is to be these people is we celebrate, hey, become who Jesus asks you to be. Don't take the easy option. Pursue obedience to Christ. Pursue what it is to be a follower of Jesus. And the reason we wanted to interview Sal in the midst of this is because, okay, on a human level, you could look at it and say, well, you went to lead a church, and now the church is closed. But on a spiritual level, you say, is there any greater success to move home, to change your life, to obey what you think Jesus is saying? Isn't that just the greatest thing? And so what I thought we could do is give Sal a standing ovation. And you can walk through, and we want to celebrate what you've done. You know, the heroes of the kingdom don't always look like the heroes in this age. And a round of applause is a wonderful thing, but it's the words. And what would be wonderful, the dream I have of this morning, is from the moment that we say the service is done to the moment he leaves, Sal is just, person after person goes and speaks words to him of encouragement. And my dream is this, that we all have the same experience. That is what it is to be the people of God. Now, we're really, really quickly going to just capture that. Does that make sense? Does that land that? Do we get that? This is what Paul says church is. This is who we become. Now, we don't just speak words to one another. Okay, so that's just the basic. That's like the foundational thing, right? We do this to one another. And until we do that, we're not church. Until we do that, we're not church. That's the truth. Until we actually are leading one another, nurturing one another with our words to become what Jesus has called each and every person to be, we're not church. Well, I don't know what we are. We're probably just a social gathering of some form. But when we begin to say, put on the new self, come on, live, then we become church. But to become the church that Jesus wants us to be, then we corporately begin to speak words to our town. We begin to say to Croydon, Croydon, come alive. We begin to speak words and actions that speak to all of our neighbors. That Jesus has, you don't have to just settle. It doesn't just have to be like this. Like, there is hope. There is life that you can step into. And so just for 5 minutes, just to finish this off, I just want to do this, because if we don't do this today, I'm not sure we're going to do it. So here is some things that I want you to know that we feel the Lord has put on our heart and is calling us to do as a community. And these are words that we will speak corporately together to our community. Now, 90% of the words that Croydon hears from us, Croydon will hear from you personally in your job, as you speak to your neighbours, as you speak to the people you live with. But the 10% that we can speak are the things that we speak corporately. And so what we speak, if we want to say to more and more people in Croydon, there's an opportunity for life. There's an opportunity for life. And so the first thing that we do, we already run our English school. Now, I don't know if you are up with this, but we run this 5 days a week, and we speak words to internationals, refugees, asylum seekers, to train them in English. And what we notice as we do this is that more and more people who come into our rooms actually have incredibly complex needs that nobody really is meeting. And what we would love to do would be begin to employ somebody who could actually be effectively a pastoral support worker who will come alongside students and say, look, not just what we give you in a classroom and teach you English, but let's come and visit where you're staying. Let's help you with filling out forms and working through applications and navigating your shopping and just the most simple basic things that are really hard to do. Now, we reckon that would cost around about £40,000 a year. But we just feel like we want to speak these words to Croydon more clearly. The second thing we see is that there's many young people in Croydon. Croydon probably, we think, has got the highest number of under 18s of any borough in London. These figures change all the time. You're working off old data, but it's close if it's not the case. And we increasingly feel like teenagers and even kids are going through life where their mind is just dark. They just think, I've got no hope. They just don't feel like they can't see what it would be like for opportunity in life. And we want to speak words to them to say, you can have life. There is hope. Jesus can come and transform you and give you a future. And we employ Lara as our youth pastor 3 days a week. And we would love to speak words to Croydon through her and through others that say, there's hope, there's life. Young people, you can hear this. A third space we recognize in the complexity of needs, something we just really feel the Lord's been speaking to us about, is what we would probably call a well-being hub, where people can come, and many can't afford to pay for counselling, and the stuff you get on the NHS really it doesn't deal with the issues. And so we want to try and provide a space where we can actually say, come, and we will speak words and hear you and lead you into life. That's a dream we have. The downstairs space in the Harvest Centre that we use, there's a room there that could be used for that. We'd love to do that. And we also would love to speak words of the culture of worship that we increasingly see God forging in this church. And in next year, what we'd love to do is we're just going to say, hey, look, who's got songs or things they think the Lord's put on their heart, submit them. There'll be a panel of people. We'll just choose 5 songs that we want to then release professionally to just put out there and say, look, here's hope. This expresses hope to our town. So there's many other ways we could do these things, but these are the things we feel the Lord's speaking to us at the moment. And if you add up all that money, that's extra money on top of the money that we already are spending. And so what we're going to do is draw on the help of Joel Lane. Now, Joel, would you mind just coming up quickly? You can bring Levi if you wish. So I didn't warn you about this, but this is the way we do things. So Joel is now going to, for the next 6 months, is going to work on our behalf as a fundraiser. She's going to put in applications for grant funding and for a whole load of people who have money and they want to give it to organizations to enable these kind of things to happen. So what I thought we could do is pray for Joelle, that the words that she writes would be words that have favor before the people who make the decisions, so that the money will come in, so we can do this stuff, we can speak the words as a community to Croydon.